Hello and welcome to part 2 of the review of subtopic 6.6 on hormones, homeostasis, and reproduction. So, last time we left off talking about regulation of blood glucose levels and the pancreas and the cells in the pancreas that secrete hormones to send out the signal to target some target cells and lower that blood glucose level by taking glucose and turning it into glycogen. So as an overview of what's going on in this subtopic, we've got our hormone secreting cells. Right? Okay, those hormone secreting cells are going to secrete, let's say these are the hormone secreting cells, they're going to secrete a hormone, right, that's going to be released into where? Into the bloodstream. Okay, that bloodstream is then going to take the hormone and further transport it over to the target cells. Okay, these hormone secreting cells are going to be monitoring some molecule that's going to end up telling them to secrete that hormone if the levels of that molecule are too high or too low. So an example of this would be what we were talking about before with the beta cells in the pancreas. They would be secreting insulin. The hormone insulin. What does that hormone do? It gets carried over to the bloodstream, right? And then the bloodstream carries it over to the target cells. What are the target cells in this case? Those are going to be the muscle cells. The muscle cells are actually just going to respond with their receptors. The receptors are going to detect the insulin. And then the muscle cells are able to use the glucose, right? And that's going to help lower the blood glucose levels. But the other cells that are really important, that are target cells, are fat cells and liver cells. And so again, the receptors on those target cells are going to respond by taking the glucose out of the blood and turn it into glycogen. Okay, and so the thing that triggers that in the first place here, because these beta cells are actually monitoring what? They're monitoring the blood glucose levels, right? So secrete insulin when blood glucose is high. Okay, here's that other gland that we were talking about. So this would be the hormone secreting cells in the thyroid gland, the butterfly-shaped gland. And they are targeting most body cells because most body cells are having to go through metabolism. And what thyroxine does, which is the hormone that's secreted by the thyroid gland, what thyroxine does is it's going to be regulating metabolic rate and controlling body temperature. Which makes sense because if it's going to increase metabolic rate when it is produced, right, it's also going to increase heat production because cellular processes like cellular respiration are going to be increased. Okay, and one of the byproducts of cellular respiration is actually heat. Okay, something else that can be caused by a malfunction with the production of thyroxine is going to be that you can develop a goiter. And this is when the thyroid gland actually swells up and grows in size to try to compensate for the lack of production of thyroxine. And this is called hypothyroidism. It's a decrease in the production of thyroxine, right? And so that's also going to decrease what? If there's decrease in thyroxine, then it's going to decrease metabolic rate and decrease heat production. So there's going to be lower body temperatures. If you have hyperthyroidism, then the opposite is going to happen. Here we have an example of another hormone called leptin. Leptin is produced by your fat cells. And so the fat cells are going to be producing leptin. That's going to be released into your bloodstream, just like all hormones. And then what are the target cells here? The target cells are actually in the brain, in the hypothalamus. This is the appetite control center of the brain. So it sort of makes sense that if you have an increase in fat cells, then you're going to increase your leptin production, which is actually going to decrease your appetite, okay, because it's targeting that appetite control center in the hypothalamus. And so scientists did some studies on obese mice, like this one over here, and they found that this mouse was not producing any leptin. This was due to a mutation in the mouse that caused it to not produce leptin. Therefore, its appetite was not kept in check and not controlled. This is a mouse on the right with normal leptin production levels and normal appetite control. This led scientists to believe that they could treat obesity in humans with leptin, the hormone leptin. And because they did end up treating this obese mice with leptin and saw great decreases in weight. So the mouse actually, its appetite was regulated, and then it lost a lot of weight. And they thought that they could use this same treatment in humans. However, clinical trials in humans did not work out. So they found that most people have naturally high levels of leptin normally, and that if it was linked to leptin, then obesity in people actually ended up being due to a resistance or tolerance to leptin. So basically, the trials in humans didn't work because humans are resistant to leptin. They built up a tolerance over time. The next hormone is melatonin. This is produced in the pineal gland in the brain and only during darkness. Okay? It responds to light. The pineal gland responds to light by stopping the production of melatonin. So have you ever flown to a completely different time zone, very drastic difference in time zone, or even a slight difference, and you noticed that your circadian rhythms or your biological clock was thrown off? Maybe you were tired, like extremely tired and fatigued during the daytime when you normally wouldn't be during the daytime. And this would be because your origin, before reaching your destination, it might be dark there at that time. It might be nighttime. So a lot of people, for a treatment for jet lag, they're going to be using melatonin, because melatonin, when it's secreted, it helps to reset your circadian rhythms to whatever the light situation is at your current place. So causes of jet lag and use of melatonin to alleviate it. Well, what does cause jet lag? It's an offset in your circadian rhythm or biological clocks, meaning your body and your brain was used to producing melatonin at a certain time when it got dark at a certain time. But then when you change your time zone, you're also changing the light levels involved, but your brain is still sort of used to the old circadian rhythm, the old biological clock of your origin before you reached your destination. So what you can do is sort of trick your brain into resetting to the new time zone, right, by taking melatonin close to the sleep time of your destination. This is going to help to reset your circadian rhythms and your biological clocks to the new daylight time at your new destination. Target cells of melatonin are going to be your pituitary glands. There are some other glands that are affected as well, but we're going to focus on pituitary. Next topic that we're going to discuss is a gene on the Y chromosome that causes the embryonic gonads to develop as testes and secrete testosterone. So this is all involved in sex determination. Maybe you remember from our genetics unit the use of a Punnett square to determine sex in offspring. So you would have your mother up here with an X chromosome and an X chromosome, right? These are her sex chromosomes. And then your father would be over here with an X and a Y. Now, what is the percent likelihood of this couple having a child who is a male versus a child who's a female? Well, let's do the Punnett square to find out. As you can see, you end up with a 50% chance. And what is this all determined by? Why do these two with X and Y end up being male? And why do these ones end up being females? It all comes down to the Y chromosome and one of the genes on the Y chromosome. So quite literally, your father is determining your sex based off which chromosome, which one of the sex chromosomes he's giving you. If he gives you his X chromosome, then you're going to end up being a female. If he gives you the Y chromosome, you're going to end up being a male. So a way to remember this is the name of the gene on the Y chromosome that actually causes the undeveloped sexual organs known as gonads to develop into testes, which would be the male sex organs, is called the SRY gene. So a way to remember this, if you're a woman, is just remember, sorry men, SRY, right? Like, sorry that you're a man. I mentioned these undifferentiated gonads. These are the sexual organs, and it's kind of interesting, before they develop into either the male reproductive organs or the female reproductive organs. So we all do start off with the same sort of undifferentiated sexual organs called gonads. Now, if the SRY gene is present, then you end up encoding for a protein known as testis determining factor, TDF, which is a DNA binding protein that acts as a transcription factor that promotes the expression of other genes, okay? And so in the presence of this SRY gene, the gonads become testes. These undifferentiated sex organs turn into testes, and they start secreting the hormone testosterone. The testes secrete testosterone, and then you've got the development of a male. In the absence of this SRY gene, there's going to be the gonads become ovaries. So these gonads, instead of becoming the testes and the male reproductive organs, they become the female reproductive organs, and specifically the ones that are going to secrete hormones that are involved in continuing to develop the female sex reproductive organs is going to be estrogen and progesterone. In short, if you have the SRY gene, you're going to be producing testosterone and you're going to develop as a man. If there is no presence of the SRY gene, you're not going to develop testosterone, but rather you're going to start producing estrogen and progesterone and develop as a female. This statement is just going into further detail about what testosterone actually ends up doing. So testosterone causes prenatal development of male genitalia and both sperm production and development of male secondary sex characteristics during puberty. So essentially this is just talking about how testosterone does cause this development of the male reproductive organs. So the primary sexual characteristics of sperm production in the testes, as well as the development of sexual characteristics such as enlargement of the penis, growth of pubic hair, and deepening of the voice. So essentially puberty. The other way that sex determination can go is you become a female. And the way you become a female is if you do not have the SRY gene and you're not producing testosterone, but rather you're producing estrogen and progesterone. So the undifferentiated gonads turn into the female reproductive system. And this is where you have the primary sexual characteristic of egg release, okay, also known as ovulation, and then later menstruation, and then development of female secondary sexual characteristics such as enlargement of the breasts and growth of pubic hair. So again, puberty, but in females. For this statement, you're supposed to be able to annotate diagrams of the male and female reproductive system to show the names and structures and their functions. Okay, so all of these labels in red, G, H, I, and J, don't worry about those. That's actually part of the urinary tract system in females. But we're going to focus on the sexual reproductive organs. So you've got the vagina over here. This is where the penis would be accepted during intercourse, and the sperm would be received here as well. And so then that's going to lead into the cervix, where you've got the muscular opening of the uterus over here. And there's also a lining of the uterus, which becomes very important when we talk about menstruation later. The lining of the uterus is going to provide protection and nutrients for a developing embryo or baby. Okay, then if we move up further into the fallopian tubes, there are two fallopian tubes, one over here on this side, one over here on the left side, and then you've got your ovaries at the end of the fallopian tubes on either side. The ovaries are the structures that contain the eggs. And so a fun fact, interesting fact, is that females actually have all of the eggs that they'll ever need ever since they were born. And so once a month, that ovary is going to be releasing an egg into the fallopian tube. And then if there are sperm present in the uterus that are able to make it through the fallopian tube to the egg, then that's going to cause fertilization of the egg. The egg is going to travel down to the endometrium over here that I was talking about earlier. This is also known as the uterine lining. Uterine lining is implanted with that fertilized egg and then protects the egg, provides it nutrients, and thickens with the help of some hormones to cause pregnancy to happen. Okay, you're also supposed to be able to annotate diagrams of the male reproductive system and show the names and structures of their functions. So with the male reproductive system, we have the testes over here, which is G. That's going to be producing sperm, as well as the testosterone that we talked about earlier. You have your epididymis over here. This is where the sperm actually matures. Then the sperm are going to swim through the vas deferens, this tube over here, noted with A. They're gonna keep swimming around through the vas deferens. Okay, and then we end up over here with E, which is the seminal vesicle. Seminal vesicle actually adds nutrients, including fructose sugar, to provide energy for the sperm so that they can continue swimming. And then the bladder is actually connected to all of this as well, and ends up releasing. This is also where the urine would come out from. And then you've got B, which is the prostate gland. This adds alkaline fluids that neutralize vaginal acids so that when you do have the sperm that's released during ejaculation, you've got the alkaline fluids that are going to neutralize the vaginal acids for the sperm, so that's going to help protect the sperm from a pH level that's not going to be good for the sperm. Okay, something else that I forgot to mention here is H, which is the scrotum. That's the thing that's holding, it's like a sac that's holding the testes. And the reason why this is actually outside of the male's body, sort of, is to keep a lower temperature, because that's better for the sperm. It's the ideal temperature for sperm to stay alive at. Okay, so the sperm then goes again to the epididymis first. It's stored there, and then it is going to move through the vas deferens. Okay, the seminal vesicle adds some nutrients to the sperm. We have B over here, the prostate gland, that's going to add some alkaline fluids, again, to help the sperm be successful and survive. And then finally, it's going to move through the urethra and out through the penis over here. So a good practice at this point would be to start reviewing those key hormones that we've talked about so far. Would you be able to outline all of their roles? Okay, the ones that we haven't talked about, by the way, are FSH and LH, which are produced by the pituitary gland in the brain. Okay, we also haven't talked about some of the functions of estrogen and progesterone that are involved with the menstrual cycle.